Good afternoon. Welcome to the third and last episode of Cargo and Jobs, Still Ours to Lose. These webcasts are produced by the Center for International Trade and Transportation, or CITT. That's a division of the College of Continuing and Professional Education here at California State University, Long Beach. I'm Matt Kaplan. I hope you were with us for the first two of our discussions. You can find links to them on the CITT website. If you Google CITT CSULB, or you can just scroll down below the video window that you're probably looking at here in the live stream player on the CITT Net channel in live stream, and you'll see a direct link to the CITT. Don't do that right now, though, because we are just getting started on what promises to be a terrific finish to this series of webcasts. We're continuing our theme that was inspired by the challenges coming our way when the expanded Panama Canal opens, or that will come our way when the expanded canal opens in 2014. In fact, this session is titled The Challenges Ahead. Our consideration of this topic began with the Point Counterpoint event held last October here at Cal State Long Beach. We were very grateful for the enthusiastic reaction that we got to that event, and so many people that we heard from wanted us to continue the discussion. So here we are with two more really unbeatable guests this time. Before I introduce them, I want to thank our sponsors who've made this series possible. They are the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, and the Metrans Transportation Center. Metrans is a federally funded university transportation center. It's headed by Dr. Jen Giuliano, and it's a partnership between the University of Southern California and California State University, Long Beach. We're incredibly grateful to all of these sponsors for their support, and not just for this series, because they really are partners in everything that the CITT does. It's time to meet our distinguished guests. John McLaurin, I think I got it right. John McLaurin has been president of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association since 1995. With offices in San Francisco, Long Beach, and Seattle, the PMSA represents ocean carriers and marine terminal operators, and is engaged in community affairs and legislative and regulatory processes in the states of California and Washington. The nonprofit association focuses on issues affecting international trade. It provides members with an array of information services, including regular updates on matters of interest to the shipping industry, and it serves as a clearinghouse for environmental practices across the industry. Welcome to the program, John.
Thank you, Matt.
I know the PMSA often hosts events which are open to non-members as well, and you've got one coming up, I think, with Mayor Villaraigosa from the city of Los Angeles.
We actually do. On June 28th, over in San Pedro at Simon's Restaurant, we're going to have the mayor address maybe some of the issues that we're going to be talking about today. It's open to the public. We'd welcome anybody who would like to attend. You can go to our website for more information at www.pmsaship.com, and please join us for what will probably be an interesting discussion.
Nice opportunity, and once again, it's pmsaship.com.
Yes,
PMSA Ship, one word.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Let me introduce our other guest. Richard Steinke joined the Port of Long Beach in 1990. He served as property director and later as deputy executive director before being named executive director by the Board of Harbor Commissioners in 1997. Under his leadership, the port nearly doubled cargo volume. It's now emerging from the recession, financially strong and ready for $4 billion in major modernization and environmental improvement projects over the next few years. Since 2005, the award-winning Green Port policy has become a way of life at the port and a consideration in everything it does. And we don't have time to list the scores of industry and community activities that Dick makes time for, but I will say that he has chaired the American Association of Port Authorities and the California Association of Port Authorities. The Port of Long Beach is entering its second century as one of the world's premier seaports. Dick, thanks so much for joining us, and we're almost on the eve of celebrating this 100th birthday.
Well, thanks, Matt. It's a great opportunity to be here, and you're right. Next Saturday, we have a big 100th anniversary down at the docks for the entire community of Long Beach and all of our community partners and our business partners, and it's a good opportunity for us to show our port and celebrate our 100th anniversary. And obviously look forward to the challenges in the next century.
Municipal band concert, which was there at the beginning, I heard.
Absolutely. 1911, the municipal band helped open the first municipal pier at the Port of Long Beach, and they'll be back with us 100 years later and joining the celebration.
Excellent. Should be a great birthday party. As he did in our first two shows, my colleague Tom O'Brien will be joining us in about a half an hour. Tom will once again be managing the questions we received from you via the chat window here in the live stream player. And you should see that on your screen right now. Of course, we hope you're going to join this discussion with your questions and your comments. And if you want, identify yourself when you add your chat there. Tell us who you're with and give us your name. And, of course, we can't promise to get to all of these, but we'll do our best. And Tom will be here to digest all of that for us. All right, we're going to get into the meat of the program now. And as I said, the topic is the challenges ahead. I can't think of two better people to talk to about this. Let me start by simply turning that into a question. What are the greatest challenges that are facing the continued leadership of the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach? Dick, we'll start with you.
I think what comes to mind for me looking in the future is how do we maintain our competitive edge? I think there's no question that the San Pedro Bay ports, the ports of LA and Long Beach, have become kind of the workhorse of the goods movement system. 40% of the cargo that comes in the United States in terms of containerized cargo comes into LA, Long Beach. We've built the infrastructure to support that. We know we need to be competitive in the future, and the way to do that is to continue to invest in infrastructure to make sure that that business wants to continue to come into this gateway. And I think those will be the challenges ahead, how to handle more cargo more efficiently, how to build the infrastructure to support that, and how to maintain that competitive edge vis-a-vis other competition, Canada, Mexico, Panama Canal, some of the other things you've talked about in your previous programs.
Do you have any doubt that the amount of cargo, the number of containers running through your port and the Port of LA is going to continue to increase, particularly now as we recover from the recession?
Well, if history is any indication of the future, I don't think there's any doubt that the international cargo is going to continue to increase, barring some kind of huge economic crisis or calamity. But I think you're going to continue to see increases, maybe not as robust as what we've seen in the past, but yet we're going to have to handle cargo in a different way in the future to make sure that we continue to have our competitive edge.
John, you and your association bring a different viewpoint, a very related viewpoint to this. What do you see, or what does the PMSA see, as the biggest challenges if we're going to maintain the level of competitiveness that the ports have achieved?
Well, I would just build on some of the things that Dick said and just add that what we're seeing is alternatives being developed around the country and, in fact, throughout North America. And so I think there's a tendency to focus on the Panama Canal as a potential threat coming in 2014. I think there are some in the industry that look at the Suez Canal as providing, again, additional opportunities or alternative gateways to Southern California. I think one of the other issues facing and a challenge for the ports is political issues at a state and a local level. And one of the things that cargo owners want to see in the movement of cargo, in addition to fair and reasonable cost, is order and predictability. And to some extent in California, it's not the most stable political environment. Obviously, we have budget deficits for the state of California, which create problems. Will we be able to build the supporting infrastructure for the ports? There are issues about just priorities in terms of what the state or local government is going to spend on. So all of these things are being looked at by the international trade community. They are tracking the political events both at a state level and at a local level here in Southern California.
You brought up two terms which surfaced right from the beginning of this series. Joey Carnes and Tom O'Brien talked about, among other factors, the importance of reliability and infrastructure. You mentioned infrastructure, Dick. You just brought up the reliability. But I think we were talking more about the reliability that the providers can bring to this. You're saying that it's the regulators, the government structures that we're dealing with that can be a big contributor to that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have issues in California in terms of the permitting process to get projects done. And we've seen over on the Los Angeles side of the harbor environmental documents that take 15, 17 years to get approval. And in the meantime, while that's going on, ports and terminals are being developed in other parts of North America, while we're just trying, for one little, development in Southern California. So those are challenges, and I think people making those investments are also trying to figure out what's the end game, or where do the requirements stop. And in California, they seem to kind of continue to change and evolve over time. So there's a degree of uncertainty for those making the investments in terms of, can they get a project built here in California?
Dick, from your stance, how much of a challenge is dealing with the regulatory structure?
Well, as John said, it is challenging, and I think the entire regulatory community needs to know that there's cargo at risk. I think sometimes there's a tendency to only look at one side of it, and that is, well, you've got an environmental process that needs to be completed, and as John said, if it doesn't get done promptly, shippers are going to make decisions. They're not going to wait around for a 17-year process. And so I think those come to reliability and predictability and not wondering what the next thing that's going to be levied on a shipper coming to California might be, but being able to give them the assurance that there is a time period that they can expect for an environmental process to get certified, that there's a expectation that the regulatory environment is going to stay stable enough for them to ensure their investment over a period of time. The ports don't want to invest in infrastructure and then have cargo flee, and shippers don't want to invest in the infrastructure that they need, whether it's commitments to warehousing or building of warehouses or those types of things, without knowing that they have that secure investment either. So I think it's all important to look at the entire picture, not just one aspect of infrastructure or the regulatory environment or the labor situation. It has to be looked at in its totality to make sure that there's confidence in the system.
Have you seen the competitors to the Southern California ports trying to get some competitive advantage out of the kinds of issues that you're talking about? I mean, going to members of your association, John, and saying, we're not going to hassle you that way.
I think if you just looked at this week's Journal of Commerce magazine, you will find numerous ads of ports throughout North America that, as you read the ad, is subtly targeting the ports of Southern California in terms of whether it's fees or environmental review process or the ability to build projects. So that's ongoing, and that's actually one of the challenges then that the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach face, is combating that. And combating, I think, aggressive marketing campaigns that I won't say stretch the truth a little bit, but may not provide a complete and accurate picture of the situation in California.
How much of the difficulty that we're talking about here is just possibly through ignorance, lack of knowledge about not just the importance of the goods movement industry in California, but the extent of it? Is part of the problem educating Sacramento? Dick?
Oh, I think that's a huge challenge for all of us in the maritime industry and those associations and organizations and ports that work in that environment on a daily basis. A public port is not a person-friendly place. You don't have to come down to the port to pick up your waste paper basket or your pair of shoes. As long as the system works and I can get what I want at Target or Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those places, that's great. And we all that work in the industry say, well, don't you understand the complexity of the goods movement system? They don't, and we shouldn't expect that. So we have a huge education effort. The ports, the associations that support the industry, we need to continue to make sure that they know the importance of goods movement to the consuming public here in Southern California and the rest of the nation, that the infrastructure investments that we make not only benefit the cities of LA and Long Beach, but the entire state of California and the rest of the nation. We know that there's a huge amount of discretionary cargo that comes in that provides job opportunities and economic opportunity to this area. So it's an important message that needs to continually be communicated when people up in Sacramento and the federal government are making decisions which can alter that balance very, very quickly.
Is it a matter of reaching out just to elected officials? I mean, how important is it to get to the staffers who nowadays tend to have much more longevity up in Sacramento than the people they work for? John?
That's a critical component of it. I would say without, hopefully not alienating 120 members of the California legislature, but because of term limits, which has really been, I think, one of the most destructive things that we've put into place in California, there is no institutional memory in Sacramento. So the staff actually for legislators are about the only thing that continues to carry forward. But because of term limits, the time horizon for most public officials, either at a state level or at a local level, is no further than the next election cycle. And we don't allow people to develop an expertise in a particular area. So I know that there were complaints of years ago, and really term limits was targeted at people like Speaker Brown, who people were concerned about entrenched politicians. And there were problems during that period of time, no question. But those entrenched politicians built the University of California and the California State University system. The term-limited legislature is cutting back and denying students access to universities, raising fees. And so because of term limits, we've kind of institutionalized attention deficit disorder in Sacramento. So we're not allowing people to solve complex and long-term problems. And so that leads to the issue, as Dick addressed, of trying to always educate these people. And I would just add, I think in the early 2000s, when cargo volumes were booming in California, that there was an arrogance on the part of policymakers that it would always be there. And it wasn't until the Great Recession that people, I think, had an acknowledgement, at least a little bit, that California ports operate in a very, very competitive worldwide environment.
So a bit of a silver lining to that cloud, I suppose. I wondered, I'm tempted to ask, instead of the question I was going to ask, do you see other things, maybe good things, that have come out of this last 2 or 3 very difficult years that give you more hope for the future? Dick?
I really do. I think that one of the silver linings, if you will, to the Great Recession was just what John said, and that is that we no longer can expect that cargo is going to just continue to flow through our Southern California docks. Other ports, other areas have looked at the success of the ports, and they've realized the job creation that can be generated, the economic opportunity, all of the good things that trade brings to a community. And it's like, we want a slice of that pie too. And so people have sharpened their pencil. There's a lot more competition out there. I think the longshore labor and the labor in the maritime industry has recognized, wait a second, we don't want to go back to 2009 where we weren't getting the hours on the docks, where truck drivers were being laid off. We know that's possible if these competitor ports start taking away our market share. So there's a better awareness now, I think, and that entitlement mentality that that everybody saw from the 90s through the mid-2000s, where, hey, we're tripping over multiple double-digit increases in volume year after year after year. That's not assured anymore, and that's an awakening, I think, that is a good thing.
How much help would a more uniform legislative regulatory environment be? I mean, and what I'm thinking of along the lines of here would be a state policy, a framework within other legislation and regulation might flow out of that, not just at the state level, though, but the national goods movement policy, which my colleague Tom O'Brien has talked about several times.
Well, I think that Tom is right on target, and one of the things that we hope that comes out of a new federal transportation bill is a national goods movement policy, or a statement that enforces the importance of goods movement to the nation. Right now, ports in California, ports around the nation kind of fend for themselves. I've always used the comparison of the national air transportation system. If every airport in the United States kind of operated on their own, and there wasn't some kind of a system, and the FAA wasn't in charge of how airplanes move, we'd have complete chaos. But there's no complementary system for ports across the United States. We all fend for ourselves, we all invest for ourselves, we all vie for dredging dollars, we all vie for seaport security dollars, and somehow it's worked pretty well in spite of ourselves over the course of years. But if there was a federal framework, if there was a national priority that said, hey, wait a second, goods movement in the United States is important. Let's put a priority on it. Let's put dollars where dollars should be spent instead of everybody getting a little and nobody getting enough. I think that might do some real important things to confirm the importance of goods movement here in the United States and California.
John, does the PMSA have a position on this need or lack of it for a national guiding policy?
Well, we've been supportive of it. We've worked with members of the California legislature to put forward resolutions to adopt a national freight policy, which I think has to go hand in hand with respect to funding a proposal. We've done a lot of studies over the years at a federal level, at a state level. We've identified all of the projects, but as a nation, at a federal level, state level, we can't find the money, we can't find the political will to move forward with these projects. And I think that's really a serious problem that we have. I would just add, with respect to a couple comments Dick made, the ports are the primary example of a user fee, if you will. They are self-funded. They pay for their projects. You use the port, you end up paying for that infrastructure. The other is the harbor maintenance tax. We in the state of California send millions, if not billions, over the years back to the federal government, and it is not brought back to this state. So we can't even get dredging funds for the state of California to keep the ports operating, and it's going into, you know, whatever it disappears to in the federal government. So I'm a little less optimistic than Dick. If we, you know, have a Congress that can't even agree as to whether we should raise the debt ceiling, trying to determine transportation policy is another thing. Gerald Desmond Bridge, top priority. But federal government's probably spent more time and effort, at least recently, on green marine highways for the Bay Area, which is a concept that's probably never going to get off the ground or work. So, you know, instead of spending money on that, I think I'd like to see him spend money on something concrete like the Gerald Desmond Bridge.
I want to come back to the bridge when we go back to talking about infrastructure a little bit more. But you talk about funding, it also makes me think of the word tidelands and some challenges to how our port has maintained the level of infrastructure and other advantages it's had.
That's always a challenge, I think, for the viewers out there, and they have to realize that we have 5 state tidelands trust ports here in the state of California. You've got San Francisco and Oakland, and LA and Long Beach and San Diego. And those are state tidelands entrusted to the local communities for the benefit of all of the people of the state of California. So when we are making investment decisions and we are looking at our revenues, that has to be kept in mind that it's certainly for the community of Long Beach, but it's also for the benefit of the citizens of the state of California, because we're on state tidelands. And so whereas we want to help our local community and we want to support all of those efforts, we know we have a fiduciary responsibility to spend those dollars wisely on improvements and on other infrastructure that's going to support kind of a greater good for all of the residents of California. And during tough budget times, there are always challenges as to which way those dollars gets pushed or which way those dollars gets pulled, and for what projects is the highest priority at the time. It's an interesting challenge for all of us.
You know, I always tell my friends, if you ever get a chance to visit the port, do it, because you really don't get a feel for the infrastructure that represents until you get driven around in there, or if you take one of the tours that the port periodically provides by boat. And that infrastructure is so tremendous, but you can't sit on your laurels. And you talk about some of the things that have taken place over the last few years. You talked about a major development when the port was celebrated just last night here in Long Beach at the annual gala sponsored by the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. John, you mentioned the Gerald Desmond Bridge, which looks like the replacement is now on track, right? It's going to happen. But that's probably, to the public, the most visible portion of infrastructure improvement that they literally come across. Is that just representative of many more things that need to be done in the next, let's say, 10 years?
That's a good example, and I think, Matt, you kind of hit the nail on the head. That's one everybody can see. That'll be we hope, an iconic bridge. But let's face it, this bridge is not just for cargo traffic. In fact, the majority of traffic that goes over that bridge are automobiles for the general public. So when we say it's a Gerald Desmond Bridge that the Port of Long Beach owns and will turn over eventually to Caltrans, most people think, well, it's strictly for port business. It's not. It's for the residents of Southern California and the residents of Long Beach specifically. And that project will go forward. And I think John makes a really good point about the fact that you know, we are contributing to it. The state, the federal government's contributing to it. But it's his customers' money, it's our customers' money that's helping to pay for that bridge. So when we look at what we're investing in, they've got a large stake to play in it too. John's members can say, hey, wait a second, you know, is that where the port should be spending its money? Is that a priority for our members? And I think we have to have that dialogue, and I think we've done a pretty good job of making sure, for the most part, that the money spent by the port goes back into the operation and maintenance of that port, and we concentrate on what's going to give us a return on our investment and benefit John's members at the same time. So it's an opportunity for us to make good quality improvements that we hope will be an indicator to the public of some of the other investments that we make that they may not see on a day-to-day basis.
What are the biggest remaining infrastructure challenges that you face?
Well, I think, again, I think keeping up with the infrastructure, you know, John made the earlier comment that there's a lot of competition out there. There's this continuing influx of imported cargo. Our ports, especially on the West Coast, haven't had nearly the amount of infrastructure improvement that is taking place in the Asian ports. You look at the Chinese ports, the Korean ports, the Taiwanese ports, they're building this tremendous infrastructure to support that export cargo that's coming to us in the form of imports. We have not done the same kind of a job in terms of moving our infrastructure along. So one of the key challenges is, if we're not going to build the same amount of stuff, the infrastructure that's going to do that, we're going to have to change the way that we handle that cargo when it comes in. You've got these huge ships that are coming in, 14,000 TEU, 18,000 TEU vessels. We're going to have to automate the way that we move that cargo. We're going to have to flush it out of those cargo container terminals, get it on its way up the Alameda Corridor to the near dock rails, to the consumers in California. And we're going to have to improve the way we do it, because if again, our indications are correct and our forecasts are correct, this continuing cargo coming into the existing infrastructure, something's going to give.
John, your members have ships that leave some super advanced, super efficient port on the other side of the Pacific and come here. What are the kinds of things that they want to see?
Well, Dick touched upon part of it. I think one of the concerns in the future is going to be the rail-port interface in terms of rail capacity. So the issue of being able to develop near-dock rail is going to be critical. I think the ports are doing a great job in terms of building and maximizing on-dock rail. But there's going to need to be more of that, more rail capacity where the rail lines approach the port, and I think that's of major concern for everybody in the trade community, quite frankly.
What do on-dock and near-dock rail, how do those fit into the overall environmental concerns in the ports, which have become so important and maybe is the biggest point of exposure regarding the public?
Well, to kind of set the stage, I think, first of all, you've got to recognize the difference between on-dock and near-dock, and without going into a lot of detail, you can build a full train on an on-dock rail facility and take it to Chicago and you know, do that within the terminal premises. Near-dock rail supports the other intermodal rail that may not be built on dock. It has to take a 2-mile trip up to the current ICTF, where it's then built into a train and it goes to Chicago or Memphis or somebody. So they work cooperatively, and you need both kinds of facilities. You know, our cargo facilities were built on the need for discretionary cargo. The Alameda Corridor doesn't carry any captive cargo at all. That's all intermodal cargo. So what we've done here in LA Long Beach is we've built for the intermodal discretionary cargo that's coming through Southern California. If we don't have those support facilities like John was talking about, we're mortgaging our future. Those are critically important for the continued success of the port. And you take about 280 to 300 truck trips off the freeway every time you build an on-dock or a near-dock train, and those are the things that benefit the public. They may not like the trains that go through their communities, and the Alameda Corridor did a lot to mitigate that, but think in terms of all the additional truck trips that would result if you didn't have that cargo on the intermodal rails.
The railroads themselves, they have a big part in maintaining this level of competitiveness that we want to see. And they face some of the same challenges that you've talked about that are faced by your members, John, and that you face at the port. Do you see them keeping pace with what's going to be needed?
Well, I think in terms of inland, they've made a fair amount of investment on their line capacity. I think, again, the issue is going to be the near-dock projects that are currently under review or about to be under review, and how fast those projects can move forward. So I think inland, things are, they've spent quite a bit of money, and now the issue is closer to the port, whether those projects can go forward.
Dick, you mentioned the ICTF earlier. Can you, for those people who aren't really familiar with it, just talk a little bit about what the goal is with that kind of intermodal approach? Well,
the ICTF, or the Intermodal Container Transfer Facility, was built by the ports of LA and Long Beach in the late 1980s, and the concept there was to make sure that intermodal traffic could take a short trip from the ports to a sorting facility where those intermodal containers would be put on trains that would then go to what we called at that point the hinterlands, or the interior parts of the United States, and move on their way. That operation is operated by Union Pacific, and it is a critical complement to what the ports of LA and Long Beach are currently doing in terms of on-dock rail capacity. And when you look at when we build an additional on-dock rail facility in Long Beach, the traffic at the ICTF dips down before it then starts building back up. So it's directly correlated to our on-dock rail operations. Southern California also has Hobart Yard, but that's about 20 miles into downtown LA. So every BNSF cargo container that isn't built on dock with an on-dock rail facility has to go up to downtown LA. The idea then is to build a complementary near-dock facility for BNSF to eliminate that truck trip and really have the great majority, 99% of that intermodal traffic handled either near 2 miles away from the port or right on port premises.
You're watching Cargo and Jobs, Still Ours to Lose. This last episode in our series of 3 webcasts that we're calling The Challenges Ahead. My guests are John McLaurin, the head of the PMSA, and Dick Steinke, the executive director of the Port of Long Beach. We're just a few minutes away from going to your questions and comments via Q&A. And if you see that chat window down very close to where you're watching the video right now in the live stream website here on the CITT Net channel, that's where you can type in your questions or your comments. Identify yourself if you'd like. Tom O'Brien has been sitting just off camera range here, monitoring these, making notes, and we'll be turning to him in just a few minutes to get some of those from you. Before we do that, with just 2 or 3 minutes before we get to that next portion of the show, and to pick up on the environmental challenges, the port has done, in my view, so much to try and meet these challenges, just looking at the last 10 or 15 years. It doesn't seem like you're going to be allowed to rest on your laurels, if I can use that phrase again.
Well, I would agree. I mean, I think the die has been cast, if you will. I was just talking the other day, there's no way to turn back. The only way to do things now is to move to the future, and we're going to continue to push the envelope. That doesn't mean that we are going to do things that are unfeasible or impractical, or that have a greater impact financially on our customers. And I would venture to say that I think we've been able to navigate that fairly well over the last several years as we've been doing these environmental initiatives that we're doing. So it's an important aspect of everything we do. We're talking about the expanded ICTF. We're talking about the near-dock facility for BNSF. There's no reason why those should not be as environmentally clean and meet the same standards that we're building our existing container terminals to this day. It takes a cooperative effort on behalf of the railroads and the ocean carriers and the trucking community in order to have that, to make that work. But we've had some successes. We've been able to work very cooperatively with our other partners, and I think that's the approach that we have to take.
John, you represent one of the constituencies that is most affected by this, obviously. It comes right off the bottom line, some of the environmental initiatives that have been put in place and others that are being proposed.
Well, I think the environmental initiatives of the port are really, there's been a great deal of cooperation, I think, with the tenants, and I think that's indicative of the leadership of Dick, of the environmental department, and the commissioners. And there's really been a partnership where the tenants have been working with the port to test alternative fuels, whether it's LNG or what have you, to put filters on various devices. So I think historically there's been a real good working relationship. That isn't to say that there haven't been, differences of opinion, but I think that really it's a tribute to the people at the port in working with the customers to move forward on all of these projects.
Well, I would just add, and I agree with John, let's face it, it took some pushing by the port, and every time, every once in a while a good nudge is necessary, but if it wouldn't have been for John and some of his customers and the people that he represents, we wouldn't have had a program. So it really kind of takes two to make it work, and we've gotten tremendous cooperation. We don't always agree on everything, but the proof is in the pudding, and the success has been proven that you can work cooperatively and achieve the desired results.
John, I may give you a chance to return the compliment here before we go to the Q&A in just a moment. And you talked earlier about the problem, the challenge of continuity in Sacramento, but that extends elsewhere as well. I mean, one of the major players in our region is about to leave his position. He's sitting to your left right now. I mean, does the loss of someone like Dick Steinke, who's headed into retirement, at least from the port, is that potentially a major challenge?
Well, quite frankly, we're counting down the days.
It's not the response I thought I was going to get.
His retirement was very unexpected and sent ripples through the industry, which is really a tribute to him as an individual and his leadership. And the issue of his replacement is something that will be closely watched and is being closely watched by the trade community. They are looking for, as we've discussed, continuity, and if the appointment process and the selection process appears to become political, then I think the goodwill that's been built up over the years will quickly erode. And concurrent with Dick leaving and retiring is the future appointment of 2 new harbor commissioners. And that process in and of itself is going to be looked at by the trade community. And I think if the process is one that looks for the most qualified candidate, you'll get a vote of confidence out of the trade community without question. But I will say his retirement, while I think everybody's extremely happy for him, people are really sad and sorry to see him go.
My guests are John McLaurin, who you just heard there. He's the president of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, and Dick Steinke, the soon-to-be emeritus executive director of the Port of Long Beach. Now it's your turn to join the conversation. Dr. Thomas O'Brien is here for the Q&A portion of our show. Tom is the Center for International Trade and Transportation's Director of Research and the Associate Director of Long Beach Programs for Metrans. Now again, we welcome your questions and comments. You just type them into the chat window and hit that button that says Say, and they'll show up on the laptop that's in front of Tom right now. Let us know who you are and who you work for if you like, and we'll mention that as well. Now, it's not likely that we're going to get to every question, but we'll certainly do our best. Tom, before we get to those, you spend your working life looking at the questions that we've been talking about. You moderated the point-counterpoint discussion last October that led to this series of webcasts. I just want to give you a chance to ask any questions that may be burning in your mind.
Yeah, I'm going to take you up on that offer. It's been a fascinating discussion. I think it's of great interest to the people online. But I wanted to go back to a point that you both have raised, and that's the fact that we've got both captive cargo and discretionary cargo that matters to the region. And yet we still hear people use the terms good freight and bad freight. And I'm wondering if maybe I'll start with you, Dick, and then John, to you, and talk a little bit more about the benefits of discretionary cargo to this region.
I think the benefits of discretionary cargo to this region really, the first thing I talk about is jobs. That discretionary cargo that comes in could come in anywhere, and it comes into Southern California because we have a lot of benefits that are offered to that discretionary cargo, whether it's the shipper that brings it in or the freight forwarder or the ocean carrier. But in terms of the Inland Empire, you look at the 2 billion square feet of warehouse space that was built specifically for cargo, and a lot of that cargo is based on discretionary cargo that gets transshipped or gets repackaged or it gets manipulated in some way that all creates jobs. You look at the railroads and who they hire and how they hire because they've got to move that discretionary cargo. You look at the maritime industry itself, and you look at ship planners and longshore workers and those types of things that are actually handling every single box that comes off that then goes onto an on-dock train or a near-dock rail facility. And so the jobs that are created through that discretionary cargo are significant, and the economic opportunity in terms of additional sales tax and property tax and possessory interest tax and all of those other things that result from discretionary cargo, in addition to that, the captive cargo, are significant for this region.
John?
I would just add that as we were in the Great Recession and maybe moving into Great Recession Part 2, that as the economy slowly started to improve, what you saw in economic studies for California is that one of the bright spots and one of the things to bring the state out of the recession was international trade. And it goes to everything that Dick just said in terms of the jobs and the associated industries that support the movement of discretionary cargo. I think it becomes another issue, critical issue, from the standpoint of a state budget issue. As we cut back our state universities, as we cut back our community colleges, we're eliminating opportunities for a younger generation to succeed. And so to the extent that this industry can provide opportunities and hopefully good paying jobs, I think is something that we need to pursue and to advocate for.
And if you'll pardon this, it's a bit selfish on behalf of my institution, but since you did bring up the universities, not just preparing young people, but have you seen benefits in the institutions of higher learning that we have here in town, not just Cal State Long Beach, but our friends over at Long Beach City College, playing a useful role as we try to face these challenges?
Well, I think it's critical. I think that, and there's been a lot of efforts in that regard, whether it's at the community college level or Cal State, University of Long Beach, USC. Let's face it, we're in an area where international trade is very, very important, and you need to have that supporting educational infrastructure to make sure that people are trained, that people get additional certifications, that there's better education about the people that do their work, and as well as training the workforce that's going to be working in international trade. And we've got this very fertile ground here where somebody doesn't, get trained here, go to school through the Long Beach Unified School District, get their college education and go work right on the docks or in the maritime environment. So I think it all kind of feeds into itself, and it's a good advantage to have that here in Long Beach.
And we're happy to play that role. Tom, let's go to one of those questions.
Yeah, we actually have a couple of questions that have come in that touch upon the issue of technology adoption on the docks. And Dick, I think you mentioned that, so maybe we'll start with you. The first question I'll ask is maybe to talk a little bit about the process that's used in adopting new technology on the docks, and then talk a little bit about how you balance the need to use technology to improve productivity, but at the same time address the concerns of the workforce.
Well, I think there's two things. One is we're not going to continue to be able to build infrastructure. At some point, the geographic limits of the port, the environmental constraints that we face are just going to make it impractical to continue to build more land. If you have less land, you're going to have higher productivity on the footprint that you have. The one way to do that is through automating the process that is currently at hand. And so whether you stack higher or you use automated equipment, those are things that are going to have to come about in San Pedro Bay. And John knows this very well, and I think you do too, Tom. You go all over the world, and they're using automated equipment in container terminal handling, and it is very efficient, and it's been proven. It's not something that is a gee whiz technology. It's present just about every place else. So we need to do that. We need to progress or evolve to a much more automated environment than we have now. That said, there's a balance between what happens to a workforce and how that workforce is changed, and I would advocate that it might change, and there may be many more workers on the docks. It will probably be workers doing different tasks than they're currently doing, and that is all part of the all part of the union contracting and negotiations between marine terminal operators and members of the labor force. So I think the automatic reaction is to back off and say, well, what does that mean? Well, it could mean a rising tide for all ships.
John, I imagine your members don't like to see their ships sitting at dock for a minute longer than they have to.
Not because of the exorbitant port tariffs that are assessed against them. Sorry. No, and what you want to see is the movement of the ships and the movement of cargo and quick turnaround as fast as possible. So there's no question about that.
Tom?
Yeah. Question asking you to put on your prognosticator hats. What do you see as the progression of container ship size? Is the future the 16,000 TEU ships on order for Maersk, or is it something else altogether?
Well, if I was to put my my thinking cap on, where we're already at 18,000 TEU vessels that Maersk has ordered, the Triple E class that's going to be out on the water before we know it. I think that probably the maximum is what that single propeller can propel. When you have to go to two propellers, I think then you start to lose some of the economies and the costs go up and a number of other things. But I think we all realize that those large ships are going to be in limited areas. We think eventually those large ships will be in the Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles. Those straight shots from Asian ports to LA Long Beach, where thousands upon thousands of containers are unloaded and then hopefully loaded with exports and gone back. It's going to have limited application, but LA and Long Beach want to be those ports that those ships call. And I think that where a few years ago we were talking about 4,500 TEU and 7,500 TEU. I don't think anybody could have dreamed that an 18 TEU vessel was going to be hitting the water soon. So I would think that just some limits are the mechanics of being able to propel one of those ships that large.
John, are these giants at the sea definitely a big part of the future?
I think we're probably only limited by the laws of physics and our imagination on the vessel side. I think, as Dick's mentioned and discussed, the impact on the shore side and how that's going to be able to be handled, I think, is a limitation or a potential limitation in terms of how large these vessels become.
Will they make the Panama Canal or the expansion of the canal a little less relevant because some of them are going to be too big once again?
Well, I think you're going to see this cascading effect, and I think you're going to see certain ports benefit from the larger vessels, and those that are smaller will go into different ranges. And I think the Panama Canal will continue to have a very important role. Obviously, the largest of the large ships won't be able to go through the Panama Canal, but ship owners and ship charters know what they're doing, and they're going to take those ships and put them into lanes that they think are profitable. So for the very largest of the ships, the Panama Canal is not going to work.
Tom, I better not steal any more time from our viewers.
All right. Well, we have another couple of questions about prediction about what might be coming down the pike. And I'm gonna again take my prerogative and ask about the question of the impact of evening at nighttime operations at the ports. It's become a sort of an interesting lesson for other parts of the country, the Pier Pass example. Wondering what you see as the lessons of that for other parts of the country. As yet, we really haven't seen evening operations take off anywhere else.
Well, I think, you know, the original basis for Pier Pass was to try to force traffic and volume from the day shift to the night shift to have a beneficial impact on local freeways and from an environmental standpoint, so we don't have trucks sitting and creating a lot of congestion on the freeways. So, you know, I can't speak to what the issues might be in other ports around the country in terms of local congestion. It clearly has had an impact in moving cargo to the nighttime. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and from that standpoint, it's been successful. My guess is, but I would defer to Dick, is that as volumes increase around the country, we will continue to see probably expansion of terminal hours in other ports around the country.
And I would agree with John. I think that's exactly what's happened. Is it perfect? No, depending on who you talk to. But has it served the purpose for which it was set up? Absolutely. I think you've got it to almost the perfect split now between 50% of the cargo being picked up on the day side and 50% being picked up on the night side. So as a traffic mitigation measure, it's worked very well.
I sure see it on the 710. Yeah. Tom?
A question going back to this issue of freight policy. We talked about, Matt, you asked Dick and John about a national freight policy, but this is a question about statewide policy. Several years ago, it was 2006, the state adopted a goods movement action plan. Caltrans is taking the lead in updating that. That's going to be called the new Freight Mobility Plan. What would you like to see in a statewide freight mobility plan? And how do we make sure that what's in that plan is actually implemented?
Well, see, since I have a tendency to only see the dark side of the world, Tom, I would just like to see it implemented. Going back even before the Goods Movement Action Plan, our good friend Jeff Brown, working with Assemblywoman Betty Carnett, did a report that was excellent at the time in terms of the transportation and infrastructure needs for the state of California. Then we had the Goods Movement Action Plan process. We were part of that. The port was part of that. It was a nice cathartic experience bringing everybody in various different parties together. But like many things in the Schwarzenegger administration, it was a good show with not a lot of follow-through afterwards. And part of that lack of follow-through is funding. The money just isn't there. And I don't see the money being there anytime soon. So, you know, it's great that it's going to be updated. I would probably challenge you to find anybody outside of the Caltrans building and maybe one or two staff people in the Capitol that even know what the Goods Movement Action Plan is today. And I think there are plenty of copies of it around the Capitol. Some of them are propping open doors. Others are sitting gathering dust. And it's not a question of developing a plan. It's a question of following through and moving forward, making difficult choices, and having the political courage and the political will. That's where we fall down, I think, in the state of California.
Dick? Well, I would just agree. I mean, you know, I think the exercise that the ports and LA Metro and a number of the regional planning organizations have come together on was not a fun process, but it tried to establish priorities and funding priorities for a number of these goods movement projects here in Southern California. And that's, it's not a pleasant task when everybody feels that their projects are the highest priority, and then you come to an agreement on what those are, and then everybody looks around and there's no money there. And again, as John said, then you look and you see if there's follow-up with political will. And I think those are the things that frustrate a process, whether it's on a state, local, or federal basis.
You're getting some agreement. People commenting that it takes years instead of months or days to move projects forward, that there's a lot of paperwork. There's opportunities throughout the supply chain to go paperless. So a lot of comments about process.
I think we've got time for one more.
One more? Okay. see. Well, I'll go with the last question that just came in. West Coast ports have lost some container market share in 2011 that they gained back from the Gulf and East Coast ports. What do you think has been the cause for this?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't know that that we've lost all that much, and I don't know what fraction the questioner is talking about. It could be a lot of reasons, and without having the knowledge in front of me, I'd venture to say it was probably, you know, a rail rate or something else. I can tell you that from a Port of Long Beach standpoint, fees are going away. Starting January 12, there'll be no clean trucks fee because all the trucks will be clean. If you want to pick up your cargo in the evening, there's no pier pass fee. So we were talking earlier about perception. It may be some lingering perception issues as to why cargo is moving away from the West Coast, but I'd like to see the details about that.
I want to make sure we understand the distinction here also between share and volume.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think that, again, looking at the numbers, I mean, our volumes have been pretty strong, the LA Long Beach port volumes, so maybe it's a broader question in terms of all U.S. West Coast ports. I just have to get more detail to analyze it and see what the real reasons might be.
John, did you want to comment? I think it's short term. I agree with Dick. It's tough to determine the cost. I think the long-term challenge for California ports is the perception that the rest of the country and cargo owners and those overseas have. And so when you see proposals that come up in Sacramento that are a little crazy and wacky, they do have an impact in terms of the decision-making process for people in terms of where they want to make investments in the future and how they're going to want to route cargo.
I think we'll have to call it quits there. We're probably already going to go a little bit beyond 1 o'clock, but it's our own channel, CITT.net, so I guess that's okay. But we do want to let our guests move on with the rest of their busy days as well. John and Dick, thanks very much for being part of this conversation. John McLaurin has been president of the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association since 1995. Dick Steinke has been executive director of the Port of Long Beach for nearly as long. And Dick, as you near your retirement from the port, I'll just say that I think a whole world of grateful industry stakeholders want to thank you and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
With that, we close this series of webcasts called Cargo and Jobs, Still Ours to Lose. But you haven't heard the last from the Center for International Trade and Transportation. In fact, I was told just before we began the program today that it looks like after a lot of debate, we now know what the topic is going to be for the next Point Counterpoint event, which will be coming up in the spring of 2012, Tom?
Spring of 2012.
And what are we going to be looking at?
Well, we're going to be looking at the future, right? Not surprisingly. When we did the Point Counterpoint last year, the question was the Panama Canal and its short-term, more immediate impacts. We spent a lot of time in these 3 webinars talking about other issues that play a role in how shippers and their agents choose port locations, the other factors that make one port competitive versus another. And so we're going to ask the people involved who are going to be taking part in the Point Counterpoint to look at the 2020-2025 time horizon. And we're going to do a little scenario development and create a best case and a worst case scenario and say that if all of these factors occur, either good or bad, what's the Southern California port structure, goods movement, supply chain industry going to look like at that point? And if it's the best case scenario, how did we do it? And if it's the worst case scenario, why? And what needs to change in the short term to make sure that it doesn't take place?
That's going to be a fun exercise.
I think it is going to be
hopefully very illuminating. Hope you guys will be able to join us for that in the spring for that next Point Counterpoint event, and we hope you'll be able to join us as well. And while we're on the subject of other things the CITT is up to, you might want to check out ContainerCast, which is the podcast that Tom O'Brien and I participate in. In fact, the next edition, the new ContainerCast, next one to show up on the CITT website, will be sort of looking back at this series of webcasts, summarizing these and relying on Tom's insight to tell us what he got out of these programs. We hope you'll share that news or those insights that you may have picked up as well by writing to us. not just in the chat room now, which we're going to stop looking at in a couple of minutes, but contact us through the CITT website. We'd love to hear what you have to say about this series of webcasts, and maybe even whether it's the kind of thing you'd like to see us do more of. I'll find my place here and just say that that's just one of the things that CITT will continue to be involved with, of course. You can find lots more information on the CITT website. Remember, there is a link just below us here, below this video window, that'll take you directly there, but you can also Google CITT, CSULB, California State University, Long Beach, to learn more. One of the things you can learn about are programs, training programs, like our Global Logistics Specialist Designation Program that many people watching this, we've learned from the previous shows, were already graduates of. I want to thank our sponsors one last time. They are the Port of Long Beach, thank you, Dick, the Port of Los Angeles, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, and the Metrans Transportation Center. And by the way, speaking of Metrans, I have a prop that we've been hiding down here, something that Executive Director Marianne Veneris picked up on behalf of Metrans just a couple of days ago in Sacramento. Transportation Award, 22nd Annual Transportation Organization of the Year here in California.
California Transportation Foundation, that's correct.
So,
and I believe we're the first university that's been the recipient of the prestigious honor.
So congratulations to everybody who's part of Metrans here and at the University of Southern California, including the director up there, Jen Giuliano. Cargo and Jobs, Still Ours to Lose, is a production of the Center for International Trade and Transportation. As we said, the executive director there is Marianne Veneris. A few other people that we want to thank. David Pluscat has directed today's program, and I'm grateful always to Tom O'Brien of the CITT and Metrans for his guidance and assistance. We all owe more than we can ever pay back to the executive director, Marianne, who has been sitting and smiling, watching us over in the bleachers here as we've had the discussion today. We are a division, the CITT is a division of the College of Continuing and Professional Education at California State University, Long Beach. Our associate producer, not associate, I better get this right because he's my boss. Our executive producer is Associate Vice President and Dean, Dr. Jeet Joshi. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks for joining us.